All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're going to crack the code on one of the most foundational and honestly one of the most misunderstood parts of our science, radical behaviorism. We're tackling section A.3 of the BCBA Test Content Outline, and I'm telling you, getting this right is the key that unlocks pretty much everything else we do. So when you first look at the exam breakdown, you see this tiny little 5% slice for domain A, the philosophical stuff, and it's so easy to think, only 5%, I'll just breeze through it. But listen, that is probably one of the biggest mistakes you can make when you're studying. You've got to ask yourself, why? Why is this little 5% the absolute bedrock of your entire practice? Well, because it's the why behind the other 95%. It's the whole operating system, right? It's how you see behavior, how you analyze problems. It's the lens through which you see everything as a BCBA. So let's find out exactly what that means. We're starting with the core idea, which is all about understanding behavior, not just the stuff on the outside, but what's going on inside, too. So what is radical behaviorism? Well, first off, it's the philosophy of our science. And that word radical, it doesn't mean extreme or out there. It actually comes from the Latin word for root. It means we're getting to the root of behavior by including everything. Not just the public stuff we can see, like a kid kicking a ball, but also the private stuff, their thoughts, their feelings, that pit in their stomach. To a radical behaviorist, it is all behavior. And this was a huge, huge leap forward for psychology. To really get why it was such a game changer, we have to look at what came before it. This is where we see the big problem that radical behaviorism came in to solve. And this chart just lays it out perfectly. Over on the left, you've got methodological behaviorism. Its point of view was basically, hey, if I can't see it, if I can't measure it directly, then it's not science. It's off the table. So thoughts, feelings, nope, not part of the equation. But then B.F. Skinner comes along with radical behaviorism and says, whoa, wait a minute. That stuff is real. It's happening. It just happens to be happening inside the person's skin. So radical behaviorism doesn't ignore the internal world, it embraces it. It says we can and we should analyze it with the very same scientific principles we use for everything else. Now this right here is the biggest conceptual leap you have to make. This is the whole shebang. From a radical behaviorist viewpoint, private events, your thoughts, your feelings, they are not the causes of what you do. They are just more behavior that also needs an explanation. So you don't yell because you're angry. Instead, the feeling of anger and the action of yelling are both products of the environment and your learning history. Okay, that's enough of the high-level theory. How does this actually work in the real world? Let's talk about radical behaviorism in practice. Let's see what this looks like when the rubber meets the road, in a therapy room. So picture this. You've got a teenager sitting across from you. They're slumped down in their chair and they just say, I feel too overwhelmed to even start my homework. Now, a different approach might get stuck on that feeling of being overwhelmed. But what do? We put our philosophy into action. So, step one, we acknowledge it. That feeling of being overwhelmed, it's a real, valid, private behavior. We don't just say, get over it. Then, step two, and this is the crucial part, we pivot. We analyze the environment. What's going on around the behavior? Is the assignment super hard? Is their phone buzzing every 2 seconds? Is there zero payoff for getting it done? And that analysis leads us straight to step three. We intervene on what we can actually control, the environment. Maybe we break the task into tiny, manageable chunks. Maybe we build in some reinforcement. We teach some new study skills. And by changing those public, observable variables, we influence the public behavior, actually doing the homework. And you know what the coolest part is? A lot of the time, that private behavior of feeling overwhelmed starts to change too. All right, let's switch gears and get tactical. You get the concept, you've seen it in action, so now let's talk about how to absolutely nail this on your exam. We're going to cover the key words to look for, the traps to avoid, and the main takeaways. Okay, think of these as your smoke signals. When you're reading a test question and you see phrases like private events, or the name B.F. Skinner, or anything that talks about thoughts as behavior or feelings as behavior, your brain should just light up. These are giant signposts pointing you straight to radical behaviorism. Now listen up, because this is the #1 way people get tripped up on the exam. They will try to bait you with an answer that says a private event caused a public behavior, like he hit because he was angry. That word because should set off giant alarm bells in your head. That's a mentalistic explanation, and it's wrong from our perspective. The correct view is that the anger and the hitting are two different behaviors, and they're both influenced by what's going on in the environment. Do not pick the mentalism. Okay, deep breath.
If you only remember one thing from our entire conversation today, if there's one idea I want you to just lock into your brain and never let go of, it is this next one. This is it.
Here it is. Radical behaviorism doesn't ignore feelings, it includes them. It just treats them as more behavior that we need to understand, not as some mysterious force that causes everything else. And you know what? This is actually a really compassionate, really validating way to look at things. We're essentially telling our clients, hey, what you feel is real. It matters. And we're going to look at the whole picture, your environment, your history, to help you. And that leads me to my last question for you. I want you to think about this next time you're in a session or looking over a case file. Ask yourself, how does really understanding my client's private world, their worries, their joys, their frustrations, how does that change the way I design my interventions to be not just more effective, but more compassionate? Because that, my friends, is where the real power of radical behaviorism is. Thanks for tuning into this explainer.